Here we go again, guys. For some reason I feel like that despite the fact that just one new character came out in this beta, I had to calculate 3 different ones. I am at my psychological limit right now. I can't do it anymore. Please, Hoyoers, stop. I guess the bright side here is that the beta period is almost over now, like it ends next week, so maybe, hopefully, there won't be time for more drastic changes. So just to give it to you straight away, there are both negatives and positives here. The main focus of these changes is again her Bond of Life mechanics. Just to remind you, Bond of Life is basically how she gets access to all of her damage bonuses. It gives her Pyro Infusion for all of her attacks and also massively increases her base multipliers for the normal attacks. Each normal attack hit she deals will consume the current Bond of Life she has, and when it falls below 30%, the positive effects end. Her elemental skill is how she can generate Bond of Life, and with the new updates, both the base and the ceiling of Bond of Life is single elemental skill can generate got increased. To counterbalance this, her base multipliers got significantly lower, and the Bond of Life decrease rate for her normal attacks got higher. Additionally, her elemental burst got reworked completely, and it now deeply affects how her elemental skill works. Here is how it was last week. Her elemental skill has a 30 seconds cooldown, but this can be decreased by her normal attacks and also be completely reset by her elemental burst. This level of cooldown manipulation led me to believe you could use 2 elemental skills per rotation to get a bigger amount of Bond of Life than normal. So, despite the fact that the ceiling of Bond of Life each elemental skill could generate looked pretty low, the cumulative amount looked pretty great. What basically changed this week is that her elemental burst, on top of resetting the cooldown of her elemental skill, completely shuts down any effect it has at that moment. In simple terms, all of the Bond of Life you generated up to that point with her elemental skill, or that you could generate after the elemental burst, is gone. Poof. Practically, this means that her ability to be able to use 2 elemental skills per rotation to get as much Bond of Life as possible is in jeopardy. However, since she now gets much higher Bond of Life from her elemental skill, that's kinda understandable. Still, as I said earlier, she also got other nerfs, so the end result might not be as amazing. Also, her healing is now coming from her elemental burst, which will heal her by 50% of her current Bond of Life and 150% of her current attack. I will keep it short here. This will amount to anywhere between 40 and 60% of her maximum HP depending on the team and rotations she's being used in. This is all she will be getting in a single rotation in terms of healing, considering she can't be healed by other characters on the team. She also has a damage reduction effect that isn't very high, so honestly she will probably be one of the most fragile characters in the game. I'm not saying that she's unplayable without shielders, but against more threatening enemies she will have problems. Now let's visualize the changes in terms of full team rotations. Just like last week, there are short and long rotation versions. In the short rotation, you start with your Arlecchino elemental skill, then you go in with your support to do the setup, then you go back in with Arlecchino to use the charge attack and claim the Bond of Life from the elemental skill, then you do the combo, and you end the rotation with another elemental skill and the elemental burst. The second elemental skill should be available in the rotation thanks to the cooldown reduction you get from her normal attacks. It's good to use it because this way you'll generate more particles with her and you will also heal more with her elemental burst. And since the elemental burst resets the cooldown of the elemental skill, you will have it ready to start the next rotation again. In terms of average Bond of Life you get, this is better compared to last week's rotation. But since last week she had much higher multipliers, this advantage gets basically nullified. But still, it's important to point out that last week's rotation had a much trickier setup because of how you needed to stack 2 elemental skills. This made teams that already had pretty tricky setups by themselves, like a Babe for example, quite sus in theory. So the new version should be more flexible and so better. The long rotation version is a true sight for the eyes. Last week the idea was to chain 2 elemental skills in a relatively short time span. This made it theoretically possible to get 140 Bond of Life in total and make the rotations very good. However, this was only possible because the elemental burst didn't completely disrupt the functioning of the elemental skill. So today the idea is to posticipate the use of the elemental burst and the second elemental skill. With this, the average Bond of Life you get now is much higher to that of last week's. But the problem here, the big problem, is that since you use your second elemental skill later now, in order to have it ready the next rotation, you'll have to extend your rotation time. I've looked at this a lot, and to me it seems like it's only possible with 30 seconds rotations. In terms of personal damage, the potential is huge for Arlecchino here, but she needs to have a team backing her that can sustain a 30 seconds rotation, like the Chevreuse teams for one. An example of a good team with a 30 seconds long rotation is Arlecchino Hyperbloom with Fiorina. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really helps me notice your support. So, to summarize a bit, the short rotations teams either stayed at a similar level or got better. So, mainly this will be the Kazuha Monopyro team, some Chevreuse teams, some Vape teams. The Monopyro team with Kazuha, Xiaoling and Bennett is similar in terms of damage, but since the rotation is less tricky, it should feel better. Overall, in terms of total damage, while this team doesn't look too impressive, I think it will feel real good in practice because of all the AoE you get from Kazuha and Xiaoling. Vape pretty much became playable again because last week I didn't think it was too usable, it just seemed too hard to set up the rotation. Now its results are pretty similar to what I got from the first version of Arlecchino, which is pretty nice because the team damage is looking very good. Still, I'm not quite sure about the practicality of this team in real game scenarios. It should feel good against bosses because it mostly excels at single target damage, but the setup is looking like it could still be annoying. This is mostly because of Arlecchino's elemental skill that you need to use at the start of the rotation that will apply Pyro and will make it hard to double swirl Hydro and Pyro here. So in terms of sealing, it's looking pretty good, but honestly there is a lot that could go wrong here. A variant I like more here is the one with Zhongli instead of Kazuha. Of course, this setup becomes much easier here because you don't need to double swirl. Additionally, Zhongli's defensive utility will be very useful for Arlecchino since she can be healed by other characters and has no interruption resistance. Plus, Zhongli enables a playstyle for Arlecchino that is not realistic on other teams, namely the one where you never use her burst. The burst is the only tool you have to heal her, but with Zhongli on team, odds are you'll never need to use it. Not only this allows you to make the rotations tighter, but it also allows you to build more Bond of Life. In fact, when you end the rotations with Arlecchino, you'll generally have around 30 Bond of Life, and if you use the burst, that will be totally consumed. But if you don't use it, that will be stored for the next rotation. So that means that for her next window, you'll have 30 additional Bond of Life, which is a damage increase for her. So all of this makes this team look pretty good in terms of DPS, but honestly it has some flaws offensively compared to other teams. First, it's high DPS on a short rotation, which means the damage per rotation is not the highest. Second, with the lack of Kazuha, this team becomes even more single target oriented, which in AoE content might feel bad. Still, the theoretical damage is pretty good for a Zhongli team and pretty much on par with the Hu Tao Zhongli teams. Anyway, for the rest, the Chevreuse double electro teams changed quite significantly, and that's basically because I had to adapt the team to a 30 seconds long rotation. Unfortunately, I haven't found a way to avoid making this a DPS loss, but in practice you should get more total damage per rotation, so hopefully that evens it out. I'll remind you that long rotation teams with high damage per rotation are pretty good in Genshin. Examples of characters that massively benefit from long rotations are New Villette, Xiao, and Arlecchino most importantly. Arlecchino is pretty much an Arlecchino blueprint because it's a melee character and he can also play in a quick swap play in long rotations, so they're basically the same characters. And I trust that the Arlecchino long rotations teams will feel good for the same reasons the Arlecchino long rotation teams feel good. So I think this team should feel good and flexible, even if you lack Chevreuse at Constellation 6. Overall, I don't know what to say about these changes. I think they're mostly positive, I guess. Like, her damage got worse in some scenarios, her healing got better, her rotations got easier, so I guess they're mostly positive for most people. At the current state, she's looking like a pretty good offensive character, great even, but her fragility is still definitely a concern, especially on Bennett teams, where she will constantly have Pyro applied on her from Bennett's burst. So that means that in these scenarios, she will be taking much more damage than normal against opponents that can vape, melt, or even proc burning. I don't know if this means that she will realistically need to be used with a shielder, but I look more into shielding teams in the future. Anyway, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the latest New Villette guide I made a few days ago. Peace!